Bone-chilling sounds in the house. There are sounds that rearrange everything you think you own. A sound can turn a living room into a threat, a basement into a place of voices, an appliance into a doorway. Tonight I'm going to tell you 3 such sounds. 3 sounds I slept through, woke to, or ran from. And that still make me check the corners of a room before I turn off the lights. These are true accounts, told as they happened to me and 2 people I know. They're not proofs. They're not explanations. They're the noises that rent the edges of normal life and left us with an ache that wouldn't go away. If you like true scary stories, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest. Sound number 1. A voice calling my name from the basement. This happened to me when I was 24. The house was the kind of old 2-story that keeps secrets in the baseboards. Cheap oak banister. A basement that could smell like damp clothes even on a dry afternoon. My dad had died a few months earlier. The grief was a slow animal thing, moving through the house like wind through cracked windows. My Uncle Steve had always been this gravel-voiced presence in our lives, smoking on the back porch, telling stories too long to matter at the time. He'd been gone longer than the grief I could name, dead a couple years by then. I still kept his fishing hat on the top hook in the closet because my mother couldn't bear to throw it away. Jojo was with me. Jojo was an Australian shepherd, with a face like an old friend and the sense of humor of a saint. She was getting older, grey at the muzzle, slower to climb the stairs, but she still knew the whole house better than anyone. She also had this way of staring at places, as if she could see the traffic of something invisible. That night, sometime after midnight, she was sitting up on the couch and not moving, staring at the basement door. I was half watching a movie and half wrapping a blanket around myself. The house was quiet enough that the furnace's little clicks sounded like percussion. Jojo's ears pricked. Her eyes went narrow and fixed on the open doorway down the hallway, where the basement steps swallowed the light. Dogs look at things differently. I'd always believed that. Jojo would track the neighbor cat through the blinds as if she could watch it step between worlds. This looked different. Her tail stopped. Her head tilted in a way I'd never seen before, like the motion had been paused mid-gesture. Then she rose and padded across the living room without taking her eyes off the dark. She stood at the top of the steps and breathed slowly, one long exhale. Her shoulder trembled. I told myself it was the house settling, the pipes, the predictable little noises of a place being lived in. But when Jojo sat and set her chin on her paws, refusing to move, something in my chest tightened. I turned the TV down. The quiet around us pressed in. "Jojo," I said, because that's what you do, call out to break the shape of whatever's forming. It sounded like someone answering from deep in the stairs, but it was not the echo of pipes. It sounded like a voice, a weak, hoarse whisper that dragged itself up the concrete like somebody climbing. It said my name. I froze. Not no man's land freeze, the kind where every muscle shortens at once and you forget how to breathe clean. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't theatrical. It was dry, like the mouth of someone who had been sick, a voice I hadn't heard in years but could have picked out in a crowd. "Hey," then my name. It sounded like Uncle Steve. My first rational thought was that a neighbor had come in through the back somehow, that someone had made their way into the basement and leaned up the steps to call me. My second thought was that the beer I'd had earlier had finally settled into the kind of stupid bravery that makes you go investigate noises alone. My hand found the flashlight on the table. Jojo looked at me like she expected me to do the one thing I could still do for her. I climbed the steps. The air down there held that damp basement smell. Old cardboard, faint paint thinner, the peculiar mildew of boxes that haven't moved in years. The basement had the furnace, a workbench with tools, a set of boxes labeled with the family's last move. My flashlight beam cut the darkness into slices. There was no one there. I called out, "Uncle Steve?" This time my voice was small. The beam found nothing but soft-edged furniture and a lawn chair covered in a blanket. The stairs behind me sighed with the house's temperature. Jojo came down a step and then waited to see if I was staying. She whimpered once and pressed herself against my leg. I went back upstairs and dialed my mother. She answered on the first ring, which was rare. She was deep sleeping in the next town sometimes, But when she did pick up, there was this tiredness in her voice that matched the bones of the house. "You hear me?" I asked, and then I just told her. The words came out in shambles. Jojo staring, the voice, the name like a hand in the dark. There was a pause on the other end. My mother's breath was small. Then she said something that moved the floor under me. "Steve's been dead. You know that, right?" I told her I knew, that he had died in his sleep 2 years back, that I'd gone to the service. She told me she'd never said it before on the phone, that hearing it from the house felt like something else entirely. We both tried to explain and failed. The silence became a joint thing we were impossible to explain over the line. She promised she'd come by in the morning. I hung up and sat very still on the edge of the couch, Jojo's head in my lap, her breath hot and slow. My heart still thudded like a fist. I called the non-emergency line. The dispatcher asked the right questions. Police came out not long after, 2 officers who walked into the house with the same polite, professional posture every cop adopts when they have to pretend they aren't unnerved by domestic strangeness. They checked the basement thoroughly. They checked the perimeter, the windows, the locks. They turned on every light and went through the motions of doing a sweep. They found no signs of forced entry, no footprint patterns that made sense for someone who had crept in at night. They were efficient and mildly puzzled. They left their card and told me to call if anything else happened. Jojo sat at the officer's feet for a long time and watched them go. The next week I stopped going into the basement alone. Laundry piled in the machine. The things in the boxes stayed in their boxes. Every nighttime shadow shaped like a person. I woke up sometimes convinced I'd heard someone whisper my name again. But the voice had been one moment, and then the house returned to its usual noises. My mother would come by in the daylight and we'd open windows and talk, and I'd try to see the house with the light in its corners. The fishing hat still hung on the hook. A year later my mother sold the house. The buyers loved the bones but wanted something newer. They offered a clean break. I could tell you we left because of the voice, or because the house kept reminding us of loss in ways that made normal life impossible. The truth is both. The voice reopened a wound, and the house kept rubbing salt into it, until leaving felt like the only sane act. I moved out. Jojo came with me for a while longer. The hat went into a box, and then quietly, another box. We sold the house a year later. Sound 2. Footsteps underneath the floor. My name is Chris. This happened to me when I was 22 and renting the upstairs unit of a split-level house while I finished school. The first floor had been empty for months, mid-renovation, the landlord said, stacks of laminate and a half-finished kitchen sitting like props. The downstairs was supposed to be uninhabited. Alone in a building can teach you things about yourself that you never wanted to know. It teaches you the difference between a creak and a footfall, the way a drip can learn your schedule. At first the noise was subtle, a floorboard complaining, a cupboard settling. I slept with earbuds in a couple nights. Then one night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a slow, deliberate footstep pattern that sounded like someone walking across the downstairs living room, outside the wall beneath my bed. It was not the quick, scattery sound of rats or the thin click of the heater. It was heavy, as if someone had boots on. It walked in a rhythm a person makes when they're pacing, thinking. A step, pause, step, pause. Then a cupboard door thudded shut and something low moved, a drawer being pulled maybe, then the sound of something dragged. At first I told myself it was just the landlord, home early from a trip, fixing something. I threw on clothes and stomped downstairs with a flashlight, ready like an angry teenager who has read too many crime thrillers. The downstairs was empty. The laminate stacks were where they had been. No one hid. No one was in the shadow of the unfinished kitchen. I called the landlord. He grunted and said he was out of state. He was the kind of man who spoke in curt sentences. Probably settling, he told me. Complaints trailed off. The officer who came by after my neighbor called in the noise said the same thing. Houses settle. People hear things at night. We logged a report, and the officer left with no coffee and a look that said he'd heard worse. The footsteps returned across the next week. Not every night, but often enough to become a pattern. They would start late, sometimes later than midnight, and go from the area beneath my bed to the area beneath the living room and back. Once I heard a coughing fit under the floor, full and human, Not a muffled animal sound, but a cough with rhythm. Once there was a scuffing like someone sliding into a closet. Once I heard a precise sharp tapping, 3 taps, right under the middle of my bedroom floor like a knuckle against wood. I started sleeping with my phone on record and left it on the nightstand, thinking maybe a capture would make me less crazy. A few nights in, I went out and bought motion sensor lights and a cheap door alarm. The landlord came by and shrugged and promised to look into window latches and to get someone to pour new cement on the sill. It was a lot of promises made in the slow, indifferent language of home repair. The real turning point was the cigarette butt. I found it the day I finally decided to clear out the closet under the stairs. There, tucked behind some boxes, was a half-smoked cigarette, tamped against the wood like someone had put it out in a hurry. The smell was faint, but there, a stale tobacco ache. Hidden near it was a smear of damp fabric, as if someone had dragged a blanket in there once and left it rolled up. The thought sunk into me the way cold water does. Someone had been in my house who shouldn't have been. I called the police again. They came and took notes this time with a little more weight. One officer crouched and turned the cigarette over on a latex-gloved finger. He bagged it. He asked me the same questions. Had I been alone? Was anything missing? Did I lock the doors? I told him yes and no, and that I'd been working nights lately and sleeping during the day. He said they'd try to run prints, but cautioned me the butt might be useless. He walked me through what not to do. Separate nothing, touch nothing, call if anything else happened. He didn't promise much else. That night, I slept with the bedroom light on and the radio playing low. I woke at 3 to the sound of a cough in the hallway outside my door. It was close. It sounded like an old man's cough, long and wet. I didn't open the door. I sat up and listened. A floorboard creaked outside my room, and then a scrape, like a rough cloth pulled across wood, and an inhalation, the kind that sits before someone speaks. Then a whisper of breath, nothing else, and my door handle moved. My hand on the doorknob shook. I did not open it. I called 911. The operator sounded the way operators do when they have to make quick decisions about things that might be imagined. I told her what I heard. She stayed on the line and told me to keep still, to find something I could use to block the door. Minutes later, an eternity. 2 cruisers pulled up, lights slicing the night. The officers searched. They looked in the back closet. They checked the basement cleats. They did the thorough, slow walkthrough that always makes you feel like they will find the missing tooth you never knew was in your mouth. They found marks on the windowsill of the downstairs front window, scrapes old and darkened, like someone had hauled themselves up from the outside and used the sill to lever a way in. They found a blanket shoved deep inside a closet under the stairs, the damp smell of it ancient. The cigarette butt they bagged earlier had been placed under a cabinet where the light barely reached, as if someone liked to keep their things secret in plain sight. No one was caught. No one was ever found on camera. There was evidence that felt like a hand had been through the house, arranging things just beyond view. It was a kind of invasion that didn't announce itself with confrontation. It announced itself by the quiet redecoration of space. You start imagining people in empty rooms the way you imagine shapes in cloud banks, and the imagination is a ruthless narrator. I moved out that weekend. Leaving felt like admitting something I didn't want to name. The landlord offered to fix the window and have locks changed, but I couldn't sleep. I had been in the house for months and never once thought someone might be using my walls as a shelter. The idea that someone could move through your house in the small hours without you seeing them was the worst sort of violation, not loud or violent, but intimate, like an invasion of privacy by a living, breathing thing. I moved out that weekend. Soundster 3, the smart speaker that played when unplugged. This one is younger in my memory and edges close to the absurd, because it involves technology and the kind of voice that sounds like it was made to be helpful. My brother Tom had been in Mexico for a few weeks on a work program and had left his apartment and the house in which he and I grew up under my care. He trusted me with plants, bills, and the house keys. The living room had one of those smart speakers on the side table. We had joked about it 100 times. You can never seem to clear your music queue. It would play salsa at 3 in the morning when you didn't ask for it, and the playlist would be ruined forever. One night after Tom had been gone a few days, I was dozing on the couch and then jolted awake by music. A low, dark instrumental, something cinematic and twice as loud as it should have been. I flung open my eyes. The living room light was off. The smart speaker was on the table with its soft ring of light glowing. I don't remember whether I laughed or cursed. I remember stumbling up, flicking the switch off at the outlet. The music stopped. The light went out. I unhooked the speaker and set it on the counter like a thing I'd disarmed. I told myself we must have scheduled something. Tom liked late-night playlists. I checked the connected app. Nothing scheduled. I called his number. No answer. I left a text that read like a joke. "Your stereo's haunted." I went back to bed after that. Sleep was thin, like tissue paper. Around 2 in the morning, the music started again. Only this time the speaker was unplugged on the counter, and its light was dark. The sound came from the living room in the same tone as before. I sat up and the hair pricked on my neck. I walked to the counter. The speaker was unplugged. Its cord was curled neat beside it. My hand hovered above it like some ritual. No power, no light. The rhythm of the music rolled through the room again, artillery calm strings and low piano. Then I heard, clear as someone standing in the doorway, a whisper. It was not the speaker's mechanical voice. It was low and soft, and it said, "Alexa, play." The hair on my arms rose like a drawn curtain. The speaker answered, and the music swelled. I remember thinking, what the hell? Who would be in there? The whisper could have been someone's voice in the street, someone leaning close to the front door. It could have been the house's little acoustics making every sound important. It could have been a prank. Everything could be explained, and yet my body had decided on a register of fear it couldn't easily come back from. So I called 911. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher and listened to the music wrap itself around the room as if the house itself had turned into a jukebox. When the police arrived, they checked the living room. They checked the back door. The front door was slightly ajar. They took notes. They knocked on neighbors' doors. Nobody had seen or heard anyone that night. Tom flew back from Mexico 2 days later because he was worried. He told me that the idea of someone walking into his house to make a joke felt like a violation he couldn't stomach. We set up cameras. We sat in the living room with the lights on and watched empty footage for hours, rewinding and zooming in on frames that offered nothing but our own faces and a lamp turning slowly in the ambient light. The cameras later showed nothing definitive, no silhouettes, no figures moving through frames. There was a point where the front door was slightly open in one clip, and a shadow lay across the rug that could have been a trick of light. The footage had the same quality as the rest of these things, a pressure of possibility without a clear subject. The device was unplugged, and yet the music played. The whisper said, "Alexa, play," as if from within the walls or out on the street. The police had no leads. We moved away within months. Cameras stayed for a little while, like bandages on the house's bruises. Then we sold or gave them to a friend. Sometimes I still wonder if someone had sat on the porch and practiced a voice, if someone was playing an elaborate, cruel joke, or if the technology itself, connected to clouds and servers and more paths than you can track, had become a conduit for something else. I never believed in smart devices being haunted, not really, but I also slept with the bedroom light on for weeks after that. We installed cameras and later left. Wrap in what these 3 sounds did. 3 sounds. A voice from the dark calling a name that belonged to someone I missed. Footsteps pacing beneath a floor that suggested a body, moving where there was supposed to be none. A mechanical voice that answered an instruction it could not have heard because the machine was unplugged. Each one invaded the ordinary. The basement where we store memory, the vacant floor where we expected renovation, the living room speaker that was supposed to be helpful. Each one rearranged the rules of the house. All 3 of them left us with the same thing, the knowledge that the world inside a home is porous. Walls keep out a lot, but not everything. Sometimes grief sits up and speaks in a voice we think we know. Sometimes a stranger finds a way through a sill and decides the night is theirs for a while. Sometimes technology surprises you by functioning outside its rules, and you realize you don't understand the systems you trust in your life. There are no tidy endings here. The police did what they could within paperwork and procedure. We found things you could hold, cigarette butts, a blanket tucked away, a window with marks, but nothing that told a full story. The dog affirmed a presence in a way that made me believe and not believe at once. Cameras recorded empty clips. My mother sold a house and we moved away. Chris moved out. Tom and I left the apartment under the vague assurance that distance would be enough. What stayed with me, what stays with me still, is not the sound itself but the way the house felt after the sound, like a body that had been touched in a place it didn't want remembered. Houses are full of echoes. They keep what you've lost in corners, and sometimes they let it answer back. You never stop noticing a new creak. You never stop turning your head when the dog stares at the same spot. You never really sleep as easily in a place that has spoken to you. If you've ever heard something at night and told yourself it was nothing, that you're safe, that it was only the house, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you otherwise. I'm here to tell you that certain sounds change how you move through your life afterward. They make the world feel a little less solid. They make you keep the lights on a little longer. They make you check the basement door one more time, even if you don't go down. There is a sound that's mine now, the after sound. The memory of a whisper in the dark, the echo of a footfall across the floorboards, the little electronic voice answering when nothing should have been listening. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a fragment of something that fits those shapes somewhere in the house where I live now. Maybe it's the pipes. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's one more reminder that we are all, in different ways, trailed by noise. If you have a sound in the house that will haunt your night, tell me about it in the comments, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who sleeps with the lights on, because these stories are better with witnesses.